Welcome to Capital Catch-Up. Today, we're diving straight into the appropriations battle over Homeland Security. Up for debate is House Resolution 7744, the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Act for 2026.
That's right, Victor. And before they can even vote on the funding itself, they have to pass House Resolution 1095. This is what's known as a rule for consideration. For listeners who might not be familiar with this complex legislative procedure, the House Rules Committee acts as a traffic cop for the House floor. They set the specific terms for how a bill is debated, meaning they decide exactly how much time is allowed for discussion and which specific amendments can even be offered. House Resolution 1095 dictates these parameters for the DHS funding bill, effectively laying the procedural groundwork before the main event.
It's a crucial gatekeeping step that often dictates a bill's success or failure. Tied closely to this broader Homeland Security conversation is House Resolution 7640, the Shutdown Sanctuary Policies Act. This legislation aims to restrict certain federal grants to states and municipalities that have sanctuary policies, which are local policies that limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement.
Historically, the tug-of-war over local versus federal jurisdiction on immigration has spanned several administrations, building on previous efforts to link federal dollars to local compliance. The practical impact here for everyday Americans is significant. If a city loses this federal funding, it could force cuts to local budgets for law enforcement or community services. Proponents, however, argue it's a necessary financial lever to ensure uniform enforcement of federal immigration laws across the country.
Shifting from domestic security to foreign policy, the House also introduced House Resolution 1099, a formal declaration reaffirming that Iran remains the largest state sponsor of terrorism.
While this type of simple resolution doesn't change domestic law or appropriate money, it serves a critical purpose. It formally signals congressional intent and puts legislative pressure on the executive branch regarding international sanctions and diplomacy. It's a bipartisan reminder of Washington's long-standing security posture in the Middle East.
Let's pivot to education and privacy, an area seeing a lot of varied legislative action this session. We have House Resolution 7570, the Reinvest in Public Schools Act of 2026, aimed at bolstering federal funding for public K-12 education, with a focus on closing infrastructure and resource disparities in underfunded districts.
At the exact same time, we're seeing action on alternative schooling with House Resolution 6392, the Homeschool Graduation Recognition Act. This is a fascinating piece of legislation because it seeks to ensure that homeschool diplomas are universally recognized by federal agencies and the military. For families who choose to homeschool, this eliminates a major bureaucratic hurdle their children face when applying for federal jobs or trying to enlist.
And speaking of expanding educational access, House Resolution 6472, the Territorial Student Access to Higher Education Act, tackles another historical disparity. Students from U.S. territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, or the U.S. Virgin Islands often face steep out-of-state tuition rates when they attend public universities on the mainland. This bill aims to alleviate that financial burden, making higher education much more accessible for those American citizens.
The legislative impacts on younger Americans don't stop at education. The Senate is moving on Senate Bill 836, the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act. This is essentially COPPA 2.0, updating the original online privacy law passed back in 1998. As kids spend unprecedented amounts of time online, this bill increases the age of consent for data collection and bans targeted advertising to minors. If you're a parent, this directly and immediately impacts how tech companies track your child's digital footprint.
Absolutely. Now, looking at our service members, Senate Bill 2074, the Service Members Credit Monitoring Enhancement Act, is on the table. It builds on the Fair Credit Reporting Act to ensure active duty military personnel get seamless, free access to credit monitoring. When you're deployed overseas, you can't always check your physical mail or closely monitor your domestic bank accounts, making our troops highly vulnerable to identity theft. This closes that gap.
That's a highly practical everyday protection. Moving to economic and infrastructure issues, we have House Resolution 5419, the Enhancing Administrative Reviews for Broadband Deployment Act. This is all about cutting red tape. Right now, telecom companies face lengthy environmental and historical reviews to lay down fiber optic cables. By streamlining these administrative reviews, the goal is to get high-speed internet to rural and underserved communities much faster.
Speaking of essential modern resources, House Resolution 755, the Critical Mineral Consistency Act of 2025, addresses a major vulnerability in our national supply chain. Critical minerals like lithium and cobalt are vital for everything from your smartphone to electric vehicles and defense systems. This bill ensures that different federal agencies use a single, consistent definition of what constitutes a critical mineral. That simplifies the permitting process for domestic mining, reducing our reliance on foreign adversaries for these materials.
There's also significant movement for small businesses and Native American communities. Senate Bill 3977, the Bankruptcy Threshold Adjustment Act of 2026, extends the debt limit thresholds for small businesses filing for bankruptcy under Subchapter 5. It allows struggling mom-and-pop shops to reorganize their debts and stay open, rather than liquidating and losing their businesses completely. It's a financial lifeline that was first expanded during the pandemic, and is now being adjusted to meet current economic realities.
And over in Native American affairs, Senate Bill 725, the Tribal Trust Land Homeownership Act of 2025, addresses a long-standing historical inequity. Because tribal trust land is technically held by the federal government, Native Americans can't simply use the land as collateral for a standard mortgage. They have to go through the Bureau of Indian Affairs to get a lease approved, which can take months or even years, frequently causing home sales to fall through.
Right, and this bill mandates strict timelines for the BIA to process these residential lease documents. It might sound like a minor procedural fix, but its real-world impact is massive. It actually allows families living on reservations to build generational wealth through homeownership, something that has been systemically difficult for decades.
We also have two specialized bills wrapping up the docket. House Resolution 7352, known as the Pasteur Act of 2026, tackles a looming public health crisis, antimicrobial resistance. Traditional pharmaceutical funding models don't incentivize companies to develop new antibiotics because, unlike daily cholesterol pills, new antibiotics are meant to be used as sparingly as possible. The Pasteur Act creates a subscription-style model where the government pays companies upfront for access to new antibiotics, regardless of how much of the drug is actually used.
It's a very innovative way to ensure we have life-saving drugs ready when superbugs emerge. And finally, House Resolution 7618, the American Battlefield Protection Program Amendments Act of 2026, extends a vital grant program. This program helps states and nonprofits acquire and preserve historic battlefield land. It's a relatively small federal program, but it's an absolute cornerstone for local tourism and historical conservation efforts across the country.
That is a massive slate of legislation spanning nearly every facet of American life. As we look to the coming days, listeners should keep a close eye on the House Rules Committee as they finalize those debate parameters for the Homeland Security Appropriations Act. You'll also want to watch for the Sanctuary Policies Bill, as it's almost certain to trigger intense floor debate regarding states' rights versus federal immigration enforcement. We'll also be tracking whether the Senate can push the online privacy bill for kids across the finish line before the end of the session, given the heavy bipartisan momentum it has recently gathered. Join us next time on Capitol Catch-Up as we continue to break down the bills, the rules, and the realities of what's happening in Washington.